afternoon, and welcome to another edition of Introduction to Christian Apologetics. Teaching this course at New England Bible College and Seminary, Portland, Maine, on Thursday nights. So for this edition, I believe we're in lecture number 6. We're looking at C.S.Lewis, and I want to commend a book to you by Alistair McGrath called C.S.Lewis. Great book. I've read most of it. It's got a fair number of pictures and things in it, writings. Beautifully done book. So C.S. Lewis lived from 1898, I know it was a long time ago, to November 1963. He was a British novelist, poet, academic. He was a medieval scholar, medieval literature. He was a literary critic, an essayist. He was a lay theologian, a broadcaster, and his writings, especially Mere Christianity and others, were well known in England because they were broadcast on the BBC. He's best known for his fictional work, especially the Screwtape Letters, the Chronicles of Narnia, the Space Trilogy, and for his non-fiction apologetics such as Mere Christianity, Miracles, and The Problem of Pain. He was close friends with J.R.R. Tolkien, who wrote Lord of the Rings. He was actually friends with Tolkien. They were colleagues together on the English faculty at Oxford University and were active in the informal Oxford Literary Club known as Inklings. So according to Lewis's memoir, Surprised by Joy, he was baptized in the Church of Ireland, so he was actually from Ireland, but fell away from his faith during adolescence. And Lewis returned to church in the Anglican communion at the age of 32, owing it to the influence of Tolkien and other friends, and he became an ordinary layman of the Church of England. His faith profoundly affected his work, and his wartime radio broadcast on the subject of Christianity brought him wide acclaim. So in 1956, he was married to American writer Joy Davidman. She died of cancer years later at the age of 45, and Lewis died on November 22nd, 1963, and 1 week before his 65th birthday. So Lewis taught at both Cambridge University, Magdalen College, and Oxford University, Magdalen College as well. So without further ado, we'll jump right into Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. So he begins by making an appeal to right and wrong as a clue to the meaning of the universe. And he talks about how human beings make a frequent appeal to a standard of behavior. If someone takes your seat, you think it's unjust, but if you take the seat, you think you're justified. Here we find an appeal to law or rule about right and wrong. Have you ever been in a parking lot and you see an empty spot, and so you go over and you sit and wait for that spot? So you wait for the other car, you're back here, and they pull out, and then they go, and then all of a sudden someone comes around the corner and they zip right into the spot that you were waiting for. I know it's funny right now because we're not in the situation, but when you're in that moment, especially if you're in a hurry and there are very few parking spots, it's not funny, right? So we think we're justified if we take the spot, but we think someone else, he says, is not justified if they take our spot. So why would that be if there were no moral law? Why would that really wouldn't bother us if there were no moral law? So he begins by making an appeal to a standard of behavior, and ultimately he's going to take this to a place where if there is a moral law, there must be a moral law giver. So he says that the moral law is not instinct. When two instincts, he says, conflict, our conscience tells us to side with the weaker of the two impulses. The moral law is not instinct. The moral law actually should direct our instincts. Okay, so what is instinct? Okay, well, we get hungry. That's instinctual. If you've ever seen the movie Madagascar, when one of the characters, the lion, got hungry, he started looking at one of the other animals constantly like he was a steak, and he kept seeing this this animal like he was a steak, and he would chase it. Sometimes he'd have dreams about it, and one time he tried to bite the animal, but he didn't, and he was just so hungry, right? His instinct told him, you need food. but he didn't want to eat his friend, right? Because I mean, obviously in the animal kingdom, they're not following the moral law like human beings are, because we have conscience that God has given to us, and we were also created in the image and likeness of God. So the point is that we can't always equate the moral law with instinct, because sometimes our instincts would have us go against the moral law, especially in a fallen world. So the moral law should direct our instincts. Because someone could just say, my instincts told me to do it. I had to do it because it's instinctual. Well, no, you didn't, because we've been given the moral law. So our instincts and our desires, Lewis says, should be guided by the moral law. So the moral law is also not social convention or education, though we may be educated as to what the moral law is. So the moral law is not instinct, but it should direct our instincts. The moral law is not social convention or education, though we may be educated as to what the moral law is. The moral law is similar to the laws of nature. Okay, the moral law is similar to the laws of nature. D. James Kennedy once said, the great Presbyterian, said, "We don't break God's law, we break ourselves on God's laws." Okay, so imagine, this great rock, and you think you are going to break the rock by being upset with the rock. How many of you have ever bumped into something and hurt your hand or something, and then taken some wooden device and tried to smack the counter, as if the counter can feel the pain that it caused you when you bumped into it, right? We've all thought about that or done that, or why'd that happen? Or so D. James Kennedy is saying we're not actually breaking as if we could somehow disrupt God's rules and law. We actually break ourselves when we disobey the moral law. It would be like going to the top of the Empire State Building and saying, "I'm going to get even with gravity. I'm going to get even with gravity. And the way I'm going to do it is I'm going to jump off of this building." Well, gravity is still in place, right? That's kind of an odd illustration. Gravity is still in place, so you're not going to hurt gravity. You're just going to hurt yourself. And that's Kennedy's point. We don't hurt God's law when we break it. We actually hurt ourselves when we break God's laws. So everyone believes that some moral laws or rules are better than others. Everyone believes that some moral laws or rules are better than others. There are two ethical theories. We've talked about this primary sort of overarching categories, and then there are a number of subsets that follow under them. One is called antinomianism, which means against law or no law, which would be what we're finding in our culture today, complete and almost complete and entire and utter moral relativism. On the other side, you would have absolutism, and there would be different subsets of absolutism. That would be, we would have that laws would come from God, they would transcend time, and they would be for all people in all places in all times. Okay, so these are two opposite views of morality and of ethics and of worldview. We talked about a worldview, the lenses that you view the world, whatever you are, Christian, Buddhist, atheist, agnostic, whatever you might be. So we find here that we don't break God's law. We break ourselves on God's law. And everyone believes that some moral laws or rules are better than others. So under the antinomian category, there is an ethical theory called generalism. And what generalism says is that, yes, there are no overarching laws for all people in all times and all places. So it is moral relativism, but with this caveat that we should have some general rules or we won't have a good life, right? So if you've ever been to a football game, what makes a football game or a tennis match or a baseball game interesting? What makes it interesting is that all of this activity is occurring within the boundaries, right? Within the boundary markers. It wouldn't be any fun to see someone who catches the ball and then someone tackles them and then they just get up and start running toward the goal line. You say, well, they were tackled. They're down at the 32-yard line. What if they said, no, I don't regard that I got tackled. Now I'm up, no one's around, and I'm going to take off running with the ball. Well, we've all kind of played sandlot football growing up. If you're a male, if you're, whatever games you've played on the, in your neighborhood, tennis, kickball, whatever. When someone, disregards the rules, everyone's like, okay, stop playing around. Come on back. Let's get down to the game. So it makes the game fun when there's a context, right? So we're finding that with generalism, it makes no sense because they're saying we just need some rules to make life bearable and enjoyable. But these rules are not for all people, in all times, in all places. So generalism is a subset of antinomianism. Another subset of antinomianism would be situation ethics, which Joseph Fletcher taught at Harvard Divinity School, and he might have taught at Episcopal Divinity School as well in Boston, which is no longer in existence. But so Fletcher's situation ethics, he said we only need to follow one absolute, and that is love. Okay, that sounds good. It sounds like Jesus. Jesus said, love God with your heart, soul, and mind. He said, love your neighbor as yourself. But when you get down to understand what Fletcher meant by just one absolute love, he defined love as situational and in the eye of the beholder. So you would do the loving thing according to your own view of the world, and he's saying that is all we need. Well, what if you have a demented view of other people and of what is loving, and if you're cruel? You see the point? If your definition of love is not defined by God, who created human beings, and ethical principles, then you're operating from a faulty base. So antinomianism has various subsets as well as absolutes. And the absolutes come from God above for our own good. The boundaries are there. The law was given to show us the character of God, the nature of God, the perfection and holiness of God, and also to protect and provide for us. And also to show us the inability to keep the law perfectly. And that's why Jesus Christ was sent to die on the cross, so that we wouldn't have to pay the punishment for our sin nature and a lifetime of sins. Okay, so we see here that the moral law is different from natural law, like gravity, in that the moral law is what human beings ought to follow, but often do not. We can and do break the moral law. So good behavior is not always convenient. Think about this. Good behavior is not always convenient, Lewis says, or praised. Just as bad behavior is not always inconvenient or condemned. Humans should act decently whether it is popular or not. Why? Because there is a moral law, and we prove this through our own human interactions. Remember the parking lot example? So think about this. Good behavior is not always convenient or praised. Okay, so now we live in a culture, because we're not primarily looking to God and to the moral law taken from the Bible, which is very unfortunate because it is the law that God gave to us to follow. People are turning, like Be Goods, the restaurant, as I've said in one of the earlier lectures, to basically say we're being good by providing you with healthy ingredient, like organic meat, good spices grown from, fair trade farms or whatever. We're being good by, recycling. When we lived in Germany, the first pastorate that I took, we were living there from 1995 on, and we never saw this. We were at a McDonald's in Weiden, a town close by to where we lived in Bavaria. We'd never seen this before. They were recycling everything back then in 1995 at McDonald's. You had to put your plastic in one bin, your paper in another bin, and then any refuse in a third bin. And you were required as a citizen there, or a an expatriate living there to recycle. And on one particular on one particular day, I took the trash. It was about 2 or 3 kilometers away, and I put the trash in the container. And then I had some recyclables that I was going to put in the container, but they had locked the trash bin. They had locked it. So all I did was leave a bag of paper. It wasn't garbage. It was just paper, basically. But I left it beside the dumpster. Well, we were serving an American military church there in Germany, and I got a call, I don't know, a month later from the military police on post, and they said, could you come in? And I was like, what's this? I was thinking, what is this about? Because I was actually not in the military, but I was a pastor of a church made up primarily of military and Army personnel. So I went in, sat down, and they said, you're probably wondering why we brought you in. And I said, yeah, I was very curious why. Look, I'm not in the military. I'm an American citizen here pastoring an American church. And they said, the reason we called you in is the Germans found the bag that you left by the dumpster. And they, these people, man, they dug through the bag, found your name and address, contacted military police, which is U.S. military police, and they wanted us to bring you in and basically reprimand you. So I said, wow, boy, I won't do that. They were very nice. The military police were very nice, U.S. Army. They said, this is how the Germans do it. Don't do it again, just to avoid the hassle. And I said, yeah. I just left one bag of paper trash beside the dumpster because the thing was locked, So anyway, the point here is that good behavior is not always convenient. It's not always praised. Even when you're trying to do the right thing, you think it's right, and you find yourself in some kind of hot water. And there are times when bad behavior is not always inconvenient. It's not always condemned. And that's what we're finding in our culture now. Actually, bad behavior, sin, is becoming more and more acceptable. And being opposed to sin and doing the right thing, you're looked at as traditional or, uptight or homophobic or just whatever it might be. So Lewis is very right in this. Good behavior is not always convenient or praised, just as bad behavior is not always inconvenient or condemned. Humans should act decently according to the law, according to God's word. That's really what Lewis is saying, whether it's popular or not. We should act decently whether it's popular or not, because there is a moral law, and we prove this through our own human interactions. So notice the next thing we find here. Lewis goes on to provide 2 views of the universe: theism on the one side and atheism on the other. Okay, so theism is a belief in a supreme God, a supreme deity, and atheism would be the materialistic worldview, that all there is matter shaped by pure chance. There's the materialist view: matter and space have always existed. Matter is eternal. So the Big Bang actually did damage to the materialistic atheistic view, because it said that the creation had a beginning. Prior to that, they didn't believe that the creation had a beginning. So the materialist view is that matter and space have always existed, and that matter is eternal, and that matter operates in a determined way, not by happenstance. Okay, now Albert Einstein, talking about the complexity of the universe and the built-in order, said God does not roll dice. Okay. Now, there were Greek philosophers who believed that the atoms basically formed different things, like a horse and a cow and a planet and clouds and all these things, but that they were just random atoms falling and then collecting, and each collection of atoms made different things, okay, in a very random happenstance way. And Albert Einstein is saying that that thinking doesn't fit what we find in the universe. He says God does not roll dice. This was not just thrown out by happenstance. Now notice theism. Theism, a mind or consciousness, is behind the universe with purpose and preferences. This mind shows himself within man. Obviously, he's much more than just a mind, but is independent and beyond man. Man does not and cannot exist on his own or apart from the law. The existence of the moral law is a strong indicator that the mind behind the universe wants us to behave in a certain way. Okay, that makes sense. So theism would be the opposite of atheism. Atheism would say there is no God, there is no ultimate purpose behind the universe, there is no moral law for all people in all times, in all places. There is no ultimate purpose to our existence. We are just grown-up germs. Just go for all the gusto you can get while you're here. And that's the end of the story. Theism would say, no, there is a creator. There is a creator God. He has purposes and preferences and plans for his universe and for the people that occupy his creation. Man does not and cannot exist on his own apart from God and apart from the structure that God has given us, known as the moral law. And the existence of the moral law is a strong indicator that the mind behind the universe wants us to behave in a certain way. That's why we still have laws. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not purge thyself, right? Bear false witness against thy neighbor. Thou shalt not steal, right? All these things in the Ten Commandments, they were given to us by God. If it used to be anyway, if you lied under oath, it was a felony. I mean, the penal system would come against you, right? If you go into a store and you steal something, more than likely you will be punished for shoplifting, okay? So these come from the moral law, and we've seen an unprecedented effort by progressives to remove all laws so that criminals go free and that citizens who obey the law and keep the true law are being arrested or penalized. You see, as Isaiah said, they will call right wrong and wrong right. They will change good for evil and evil for good. We're seeing that today in an unprecedented rate. So Lewis says we have cause to be uneasy. Is this divine mind saying anything new? Progress is getting near the goal, but a wrong turn requires that we go back and change course. If the divine mind, if it were deism, is impersonal, then we should not think that we have to ask for any breaks. So what he's trying to say is if deism is true, deism is not the Christian view of the world. Deism would state that that God is like a divine clockmaker, that he wound up this big giant clock, which is the universe, and then he just dispassionately walked away and is not involved. That is the belief of deism. And Lewis is saying if deism is true, then God is impersonal and really is not interested in his creation. He's not interested in having a relationship with his creation. That would be deism. And he said if deism is true, if God is a deistic God, then we should not think that we can ask for any breaks, right? You won't be able to have a relationship with a God who, if he's deistic. So we know that that is not the true living God. The true living God is personal. He is loving. He is good. He is righteous. He is kind. He is faithful. He is just. And on and on and on and on it goes. Forgiving. So Lewis says Christianity makes perfect sense if you look at the facts. We are under the law. We break the law as human beings. We confess our sins to God. We receive forgiveness through Jesus Christ, the perfect man, holy God, accomplished on our behalf. Within the Christian faith, you begin with despair, which is our sinful condition. Okay, in the Christian faith, well, I would even back up and say we begin with the good creation of God. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. God looked at his whole creation after he created it, and he said, and behold, it is very good. Okay, so everything that God made was great. There was no junk. God did not make any junk. What happened is Adam and Eve were given a choice. They could eat from all the trees of the Garden of Eden. There was only one tree that they could not eat of, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. God told them, in the day that you eat it, you shall surely what? Die. That means they wouldn't die. They wouldn't have died before if they had never eaten the tree. They would have not died physically, and they would not have been cast out of the garden and lost spiritual. They would have spiritual separation with God. So notice what essentially happened is God created a good creation. There was only one prohibition that they had at the time: do not eat of the knowledge of the tree of good and evil. They ate of the tree after they were tempted by Lucifer, the devil, through the form of the serpent. They ate of the tree, and what happened? At that point, the death process was initiated. Then they would live out their days, and then they would physically die. If they had not eaten of that tree, they would have never died. Okay, but here was the mercy of God, even in their disobedience. God set forth a prophecy, I believe it's in Genesis 3:15, that Jesus Christ would go to the cross. He would crush Satan's head. Now, what he would do on the cross, meaning he would crush the work that Lucifer did in tempting Adam and Eve to sin and bring God's wrath upon the human race. Jesus would take our sin debt on the cross. He would crush the serpent's head, but the serpent would bruise his heel, meaning Jesus himself would actually die on the cross. But this was all preordered by God. So you see the beauty of this? Really, Christian faith begins with good news. God created the heavens and the earth. God created you to know him and love him. But then it takes us to a place of despair because we are sinful and separated from God. So that takes us to the good news of the Lord Jesus Christ and the new birth. Paul says, if any man is in Christ, he's a new creation. Behold, the old is gone. Behold, all things have become new. So at this point, we're going to go ahead and wrap up this sixth lecture, and we will pick up again in the next lecture with Book 2, What Christians Believe. Okay, thank you for joining me today, and God bless you.